So I think that's pretty much it for me. I'm going to hand things over to John to introduce our two people, Jason and Emma.
Thank you, Pam. I'd just like to start by saying, as a program director, that I know we have the pandemic in place right now, but if things ease up and anybody would like to lead a hike, if we're allowed to have more than, I think we can only have 10 people outside, but if anybody has an idea to lead like a tree identification hike or a snowshoe event anywhere in the area, please get in touch and we can set that up sooner than later. So about tonight's talk, I've been in the club for about 25 years now, I think. And somewhere along the way, I started to hear about using fire to refresh the habitat and different types of landscapes, grasslands, forests, that sort of thing. But I didn't really know anything firsthand about it. And with my bird watching, I got going to Point Pelee, and then soon after I was going to Pelee Island. And I did discover the Stone Road Alvar Nature Reserve there, and actually traversed it more than once while I was birding on the southern half of the island. And then I just about 2 years ago, I started hearing that they had a plan to do a burn there, and that there was kind of a 3-step process to document, do an inventory of what was there at the time, and then plan the burn for the following season and see how that came along, and then do a follow-up inventory in the 3rd year. So it sounded simplistic, but I thought, and I may have that a little bit off, but that was my understanding. And I thought that would be a great thing for the club to have that. So I kind of I already had that in mind. And then one day I was trying to contact some of the forestry people in our club, and I was emailing, and then I phoned, and I finally found it. Well, oh no, they're away at Pelee Island. And I thought, what are they doing there? And I found out that the people that are doing the burns for Ontario Nature and other agencies as well is our lone local lands and forest consulting, which I remember being based out of Chesley. Maybe Elmwood is where Jesse lives now. But I knew Dave Taylor from that club, or that company, over 20 years ago, and I dealt with him a bit. And so I learned that this company has been doing these burns because they have the people trained and certified to do these burns properly, and they draw on the people from our club, like the people I was trying to contact, to help out with those, because they have the experience and training in their background. Even if they're retired now, they still have those skills and they keep their certification up. So I thought, well, if we're going to have this program about the burn process at the Alvar, I'd really like to have that local contact as well, and have some input from Lands and Forest Consulting. So I did ask Emma about that, and she said, yeah, Jesse would be was in agreement, but it turned out Jesse's not available tonight. So we have Jason joining us, and he's actually the burn boss who was in charge of the most recent burn at Pelee Island, and he's been involved with activities there in the past. And Emma from Ontario Nature is the person who's sharing this kind of information with the public on behalf of Ontario Nature. So I'm really looking forward to what she can do to take us through this process, and what was the reasons. I put in the rationale, the risks, and the rewards of doing this kind of program in this habitat. So I'm really looking forward to it, and I'll turn you over to Emma right now. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, John. I'm just going to bring up my presentation here. And nice to see you, Jay. It's been, the last time we saw each other was on Pelee while the burn was taking place in 2019. So it's nice to see you again after a few years. Yeah, so it's my pleasure to be here today. I was really looking forward to coming up to Owen Sound, and actually it's such a beautiful area, and I was looking forward to an in-person presentation, but virtual will have to do for now. But it's a real pleasure for me to have the opportunity to talk about the work that we've been undertaking on the Stone Road Alvar Nature Reserve since 2018, and share a little bit about sort of the rationale behind the project and some preliminary results from the monitoring work that we've been doing surrounding the prescribed burn. So as John mentioned, my name's Emma. I'm the Conservation Projects and Education Manager at Ontario Nature. And I think most people joining on the call today have a good sense of who Ontario Nature is, but I thought that I would still give just a brief background and share a little bit about the work being done through our various programs. Ontario Nature's mission is to protect wild species and wild spaces, and we work towards achieving this mission through conservation, education, and engagement. And we have a number of core programs that help us towards achieving this mission. Some of those include our Boreal program, which is based out of Thunder Bay. We have our Nature Guardians program, which is focused on youth engagement, both high school age youth as well as university age youth, and fostering a sense of love and appreciation for nature at a young age, and creating opportunities for youth leadership opportunities for youth to undertake environmental action within their local communities. We have our Greenway program, as well as our community science program, and are excited with the undertaking of the third breeding bird atlas, which started in 2021, and so we're just entering into the second year of that project, which is a fantastic volunteer initiative collecting data on Ontario's breeding birds. So that's through the community science program. And really what I'm going to be focusing on in my presentation today is our nature reserves program. And so, as you likely know, Ontario Nature oversees 26 different nature reserves located across Ontario, and we also have an additional 3 conservation easements. Collectively, this totals just a little over 7,000 acres or 2,900 hectares. And this map here shows the dots show the location of each of those 26 properties, and the Stone Road Alvar Nature Reserve is this dot all the way down towards the bottom of the map within southwestern Ontario, and it's an island that occurs within Lake Erie, and that's the focus of the work that I'll be talking about today, is on that nature reserve. So for those of you who have had the opportunity to visit Stone Road Alvar, it's just really such a special place. Located on the southeast corner of Pelee Island in Lake Erie. You take the ferry across to access the island, and it really is just a biodiversity hotspot. I think most people would probably have heard about it as just a fantastic birding, a place to bird during spring or fall migration, but it really represents a lot of the unique biodiversity that we still have across southern Ontario. So for Ontario Nature's property located on the island, it is roughly, it's a little over 100 acres in size, and it is home to 44 provincially rare and 33 regionally rare plant species. And this property and a number of other conservation lands across the island provide habitat for several at-risk species, which include snakes, plants, as well as invertebrates. So I thought I'd just start my presentation by talking a little bit about Alvars themselves and why they're so unique and special. And I think, it's been, I love the unique ecology of these ecosystems, and sort of understanding exactly what processes make them such biodiversity hotspots. So Alvars are naturally open areas with either a thin soil profile or no soil at all. And they occur over limestone, dolostone, or marble bedrock. Trees are largely absent from Alvars, and when you do see them, they're very sparse. So they're not forming a continuous canopy. So the less than 60% tree cover and sort of that sparse patchiness of tree distribution and that open area is really a distinctive feature of Alvars. And the flora and fauna that occur within these areas are adapted to these extreme environmental conditions that are really influenced by these thin soils. So you have disturbances such as flooding in the spring that make the system very saturated, and the soils become extremely waterlogged during this time. And then in the summer, as with the extreme dry, hot temperatures, these systems then become they become very dry. So, polar opposites between the spring and the summer months, and they really experience these extremes. Of course, fires are also an important disturbance as part of Alvar habitats, and collectively these sort of disturbances really help to shape the unique plant and animal communities that we find within Alvar habitats. And they prevent woody species from invading these open areas and promote high species diversity. So what do we know about grassland Alvar ecosystems and fire? Well, we know that fire is a really important and necessary component of their ecology, and that this type of natural disturbance is needed in order to decrease the abundance of woody shrubs and increase the abundance of native Alvar species. And what we've been seeing more and more over time on Stone Road Alvar is the encroachment of shrubs such as prickly ash and staghorn sumac that are really moving into these open habitats. Historically, there have been prescribed burns on Stone Road Alvar. These photos are actually slides that were scanned and taken at a burn that took place in 1999. And our most recent burn since then was in 2019. But I always enjoy seeing the historical photos. So I just thought I'd show a couple here to give you a sense of what things look like on the ground back in 1999. And we had a number of objectives with this project. Very broadly, the objective was to implement a prescribed burn on Ontario Nature's Stone Road Alvar Nature Reserve. And we wanted to determine the effectiveness of this stewardship action at maintaining habitat for species at risk. So you'll notice here in the map to your right, there are a number of different land parcels depicted. So the property that is outlined in red is the Ontario Nature property. That's part of the larger Stone Road Alvar complex. Then you have the parcels that are outlined in orange, and those are parcels owned by the Nature Conservancy of Canada. And then the yellow parcel is a property owned by Essex Region Conservation Authority. So we're in this, there's a quite a number of conservation partners within this part of the island that sort of collectively steward this larger Stone Road Alvar complex. And the prescribed burn was focused on the area delineated in green on the Ontario Nature property. So we focused on burning roughly 22 acres of Alvar habitat in 2019 through this project. And we conducted monitoring both before and after the burn occurred, and we are actually continuing to conduct post-burn monitoring. So we had 2 years of pre-burn data collection, both in 2018 and 2019. The burn took place in 2019, and we've had data collection, although COVID has put a slight sort of wrench in our plans in terms of being able to access the island, but we're continuing to monitor after the burn. So we're focused on largely rare and at-risk species and their habitats, and trying to understand how different species respond to burn. Monitoring efforts have focused on plants, invertebrates, snakes, lichens, birds, small mammals, and gray fox. So hopefully you get, this is a massive research effort, and that includes many partners. Certainly it's not something that the extent of this monitoring is not something that Ontario Nature could undertake on its own. And we really have developed a lot of research partnerships in order for us to be able to do this work. So some examples of plants include blue ash, climbing prairie rose, common hop tree. And in terms of invertebrates, we've looked at a number of bumblebees, as well as the broad-banded forest snail, which I'll touch on in a little bit in terms of some preliminary results, monarch, and invasive earthworms. And in terms of snakes, we've looked at blue racer and eastern fox snake. So in order for us to determine the impact of the burn, we had monitoring sites set up in both burned and unburned areas. So our unburned areas are acting as our control. And so monitoring sites were set up, again, with looking at the map within those green patches delineated within the Ontario Nature property. And then we had additional comparable monitoring sites set up and on adjacent conservation lands that didn't receive the burn. So it allowed us to be able to compare. And here are some photos of the prescribed burn that took place in 2019. So this is the Lands and Forest crew that came out, and Jay will, explain all the intricacies that goes into creating these prescriptions for a particular site, and then all the planning that goes into the implementation itself. And yeah, so these are some photos. It was a low intensity burn across that burn area, which I outlined. Here are some more photographs. And we actually had a resident of the island take this video. It's kind of like a stop. It shows the burn in progress. And so it's a short little one, just a little over a minute. So I thought I'd share that with you all, just to give you a sense of what things look like on the ground. So hopefully that gives you a sense of, that's a very sped up video of the burn, but this is the first, we spent a lot of time talking about and planning this project, and it was really interesting to actually have the opportunity to be at the site while the burn took place. So I wanted to share that with everyone, just to help you visualize what things actually looked like. And so when I talk about this project and the monitoring effort involved, it's really, there are a lot of really interesting results that we're now starting to get from our, over 3 years of monitoring. And I just wanted to highlight some preliminary results from one aspect of the project. So this is work being done by Annegret Nicolai, who is looking specifically at the impact of the prescribed burn on an endangered snail, the broad-banded forest snail, which occurs on Pelee Island, as well as invasive earthworms. And Annegret and her students are based out of the University de Rennes, which is located in Paris, France. So what is the role of, when we talk about snails and earthworms, what is their role in Alvar ecosystems? So as plants grow, they senesce and the leaves fall and accumulate on the surface of the soil. And when we zoom in at the soil horizon in that sort of shallow layer of soil occurring within the Alvar, what you actually see is the immense diversity and the intricacies of the interactions happening within that topsoil food web. And those animals and the interactions happening within the topsoil play a really important role in terms of breaking down the dead plant material and cycling it back into the system as available nutrients to support continued plant growth, as well as food and shelter for other animals. And of course, snails and earthworms are two key players within the topsoil food web. So in terms of Annegret's research questions with this project, we know that broad-banded forest snail relies on leaf litter for food and shelter, and that habitat provides a really important microhabitat for the snail. So her research question here was, will fire negatively impact the species, the snail on Stone Road Alvar? Her secondary research question was related to European earthworms, which we know are an invasive species. And these earthworms really have a destructive impact on the snail's food resources and shelter. So here her question was, to what extent will the fire help to control earthworms on Stone Road Alvar? So those were the two main questions that she focused on for this project. And I'll highlight in some of her preliminary results. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the broad-banded forest snail, it is, as its name suggests, it has brown bands on its shell, which are distinctive for identification. The snail is about 2.5 centimeters in size, so it's a fairly large snail. Other characteristics identifying features include a large lip, as well as a big hole underneath when you flip the shell upside down. And the broad-banded forest snail also has a pale body. This species lives for 4 to 6 years, and it takes approximately 2 to 3 years to reach maturity. In terms of its life cycle, it reproduces in the spring. It undergoes estivation in summer, so you'll see it often hanging out on the vegetation throughout the summer. And then it hibernates over the fall and winter. It actually closes up its shell and hibernates in the soil. And when you look at the range for this species across Canada, it's very limited. The historical range for the broad-banded forest snail occurs within these three areas depicted on the map, outlined in blue. So that's its historical range, and its current range includes the areas circled in green, which includes Pelee Island and Point Pelee. And if we zoom in even closer to Pelee Island itself, we don't find this species across the entire island, but across these three sort of distinct local areas within the island, including Stone Road Alvar, that Stone Road Alvar complex towards the south end of the island. For Annegret's monitoring, what they did to determine the impact of the burn on this species is they went out and counted snail density, both before and after the burn. So what you can see here, so each of the blue patches is showing different densities of broad-banded forest snail. And what you'll notice, first of all, is there are, three different shades of blue. So there is quite a patchy distribution of snail density across the property, with some areas in dark blue showing a higher density of 3 to 4 snails per meter squared, and other areas depicted in this sort of medium blue have 2 to 3 snails per meter squared, and then areas that have in the light blue that are showing 1 to 2 snails per meter squared. So there is a patchy distribution across the property in terms of snail density. And so this is the data that was collected before the burn took place. After the burn, what we saw is in this yellow shaded circle, we saw a reduction in the density of snails. So after the burn, there was fewer snails in this area compared to other areas where the density remained the same. So the sort of conclusion here is that fire did reduce snail abundance, but it wasn't uniform across the site. And I mean, the burn itself was patchy, so that makes sense. Now looking a little bit closer at the data for earthworms. First, taking a step back, often when we think about earthworms, we kind of we think of sort of a generic category, but there are actually many different functional groups of earthworms that play different roles. So we have the epigeic earthworms, which tend to be smaller. They occur in the leaf, only in the leaf litter, and they don't do any burrowing. We have the endogeic. These are medium-sized earthworms, and they are found deeper in the soil, and they actually burrow horizontally. We have strict anisic, and these are also like a larger earthworm, and they are found deeper in the soil horizon as well, but they, instead of burrowing vertically, burrowing horizontally, they burrow vertically. And you can find castings from this functional group along the soil surface. And then we have kind of a combination of the epianisic. So these are found in the topsoil, but they burrow vertically. They have short vertical burrows. So when Annegret's research group were studying earthworms, they were looking at these various functional groups and how they change with the burn across Stone Road Alvar. So in terms of sampling, Annegret, they visited both the Ontario Nature property as well as the other control sites, so the NCC as well as the IRCA property, and they looked at earthworm density, or the number of earthworms across these different sites. They also sampled earthworms in forest habitat to be able to compare with the Alvar sites. And the figure on the top of the slide is showing the number of earthworms at each of the 5 sites. So we have Ontario Nature, IRCA, NCC, and then our forest site. And what you see is the number of earthworms is the same, roughly the same across the 3 Alvar sites, and slightly higher in the forest site, which makes sense because of the deeper soil profile. And then when you look at the functional groups based on the number of earthworms, you can see a greater representation of the endogenic functional group within the forest, which relies on those deeper soil horizons. Looking at the impact of the burn on earthworms, these 2 figures are showing, the red figure is showing the burn site, so this is the Ontario Nature property, and then our Alvar control site. So this was a comparable site, but did not receive the burn treatment. And we see across both sites a decrease in the number of earthworms before and after the burn. But because this same pattern is seen at our control site, we can say, that the burn had no effect on the quantity of earthworms. But what's interesting is when you look more closely at changes in the functional groups and how the burn and the impact of the burn at that scale. So these figures, again, are showing the burn area on Ontario Nature's property in comparison to our control site. And at the Ontario Nature site, there was representation of of 3 different functional groups before the burn took place. And then after the burn, we see a drastic change. And that pattern is not seen within our control site. So in conclusion, in the burn area, litter feeding earthworms disappeared, which is not a pattern that was seen within our unburned sites. So just some conclusions and sort of next steps and questions looking at these preliminary results. So coming back to the original question of, to what extent does fire negatively impact the broad-banded forest snail on Stone Road Alvar? We saw that fire reduced the number of snails, but that was not uniform across the site. And the question that remains is to what extent will the species easily recolonize those areas? In terms of the earthworms, we found that we saw an elimination of the litter feeding species in sites that were burned. And again, in our continued monitoring effort, we'll be looking to see how fast those that functional group reestablishes within the earthworm community. So that's just a snapshot of some of the results from the pre and post burn monitoring data that we've been collecting. And I just thought I would share this photograph of Annegret's taking a closer look on Stone Road Alvar. And you can see the litter and all the snails kind of hanging out across the Alvar. And there's so many more results to be shared, and I look forward to be able share results from our data collection efforts for snakes and birds and bumblebees and monarchs. There's lots more to come. So of course, I mentioned earlier on how hugely collaborative this project is. There have been a number of key partners, including the Nature Conservancy of Canada, Essex Region Conservation Authority, the local Essex County Field Naturalist Club, of course, our research partners, Natural Resources Solutions, the University of Toronto, University de Rennes, the Canadian Museum of Nature, Trent University. The Township of Pelee was hugely helpful in planning the logistics surrounding the burn and helping to communicate our plans to the residents and community of the island, and in hosting outreach events to share more about the project. And of course, Lands and Resources in developing the prescription for the burn on Stone Road and conducting the burn itself. And our funders, we couldn't have done this work without financial support from a number of funders. And if you're interested in learning any more about this project, we have an article in the winter 2019 issue of Ontario Nature magazine. And we often run outreach events on the property. So if you visit our events page through our website, you can find out more about various outreach events that are being planned. And hopefully you'll be able to join us on the island. And any, just general information about the Nature Reserves program can be found through this link below on our website. And just some more historical photos from the burn in 1999. And I'll turn it over to Jay to share a little bit more about prescribed burns. And I'm happy to take any questions later on.
Thanks, Emma. Really good to see you too again. It's been a few years.
Yeah.
Quick years, strange years. It's good to see those pictures. So
yeah.
Jason Sickel, and I'm with Lands and Forests Consulting. A little bit about myself. I started my fire career with MNRF, Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, back in 1997. I was part of the Stone Road Alvar burn with the MNR in '99, and again in 2005 on the Urca side of things, and then most presently in 2019. I've been part of probably 700 prescribed burns since that time, since 1997. I started with Lands and Forests Consulting, doing prescribed burns with them during years when the MNR was locked out on strike. So just odd years here and there, and then full time in 2008. In 2010, I became the burn boss, and I've been orchestrating, planning, and managing prescribed burns for Lands and Forests ever since. I'm also acting captain with the Barrie Fire Department, and I've been with them since 2008 as well. Lands and Forest Consulting does all kinds of land management applications. One branch of it is prescribed burning. My apologies, I didn't put together a presentation for everybody. I was asked by Jesse to fill in. He was looking forward to this and he wanted to take part, but he just had obligations. So I was more than happy to step up here. Like I said, I don't have a presentation. I've been busy planning prescribed burns for the spring. We have a really busy spring where many new clients this year, which is really good. And we have a lot of reoccurring prescribed burns as well. on top of trying to keep my young children on track with school. But they go back on Monday, so I'll have a lot more free time to do the planning portion. But we do all kinds of different burns. We get into stand conversion burning, where we want to change the whole dynamics right around almost 180 degrees. We might want to take it from a pine plantation to a hardwood, or a woodland to an open grass prairie. We do tall grass prairie restoration burning along with tall grass prairie establishment burns. So we're right there from the beginning, and then we get into the end of it where we start getting into tall grass prairie maintenance burning. Oak savanna woodland ecosystem enhancements, fire hazard reduction slash removal. We get, for the bird watchers, we get into bobolink habitat restoration and enhancement, and Kirkland warbler, same thing, habitat creation and maintenance, and all of those ecosystems require different frequency of burning applications to keep those sites open and keep those habitats sort of pristine for those certain flora and fauna. We are Laser Force, a little bit of background, Laser Force Consulting. Outside of the M&R, we are the only organization recognized by the M&R to carry out high complexity burns in Southern Ontario, or in all Ontario, but most of our burns are in Southern Ontario just because of logistics and traveling. So each of these burns that I mentioned are categorized as either low complexity and high complexity, and a lot of different varying factors go into which ones are low, which ones are high. But we carry a really good team of experienced former wildland firefighters, present wildland firefighters, and which allows us to conduct high complexity prescribed burns within large municipalities such as Toronto and Mississauga, Oakville. We do burns at Jack Darling and High Park, and sort of high interest, high complexity sort of places such as that. But the Stone Road Alvar, this is although the burn itself is one of low complexity because there's not a lot of smoke impact and all the other intricacies that go into determining what complexity it is, but it's deemed a high complexity burn because just of the logistics alone. It can be a logistical nightmare. And when you look through the history of the burning that's been conducted at the Stone Road Alvar, it's been canceled more times than it's been successful. Been canceled due to weather, it's been canceled due to public perception, it's been canceled due to funding. It's a tiny island in the middle of a water body, and it's hard to forecast from 300-400 kilometers away what the actual weather is going to be happening or doing at the time you mobilize and move the troops down there to conduct a prescribed burn. So when we talk about planning, a lot of planning goes into conducting one of these to make sure that you meet the objectives and you come out on top success-wise. So it starts with touching base with the client, scheduling a date to visit the site. You do a walkthrough. You look at the fuel types that are on site. You look at the fuel types that are going to rebound post-fire. Look at all the different variances, the lowlands, the highlands, what's going in the drought, what's still green. You look at the wind direction, the effects of wind, the velocity, how much it's restricted. So when I touched about that, when we burnt that day in 2019, we had 2 km/h winds on site. But if we went out to the lake shore, there's white caps. So we actually had over the open water, it was 25, 35 kilometers an hour or more, but on site we only had 2 kilometers. So it's really isolated and there's lots of wind restriction on site. We talked to the client, we try to get the best understanding of what the objectives are. If we have the objectives, then I can put together a prescription that meet those objectives and keep everybody safe while doing so. So that usually takes place the year prior to conducting a prescribed burn. In this case, we did all that in 2017. We projected to do a burn in 2018. I think the funding fell through in 2018 and we weren't able to burn, so everything was postponed into 2019. Not a big deal because it hadn't been burned since 2099. 1 more year wasn't going to affect anything any farther than it already had been. So we put together a prescribed burn plan, and it's a document. It's a document from A to Z of what needs to happen to pull off this burn successfully. It talks about the objectives. It talks about, there's a detailed field description. We get into the weather parameters that we're looking for to achieve the type of fire. And when I say type of fires, we're looking for fire behavior, and what kind of fire behavior is going to meet the objectives at Stone Road Alvar. And in this case, we wanted a fire that was going to clear away the fine fuel surface layer, the litter layer, set back the woody vegetation and the woody shrubbery that's invaded back into the site, and promote the rare Alvar species that are fire dependent and fire tolerant, and that have been suppressed over the years. A lot of times fire kickstarts a lot of these suppressed native warm season or fire tolerant species. The cool and a big thing the fire does, if it's timed correctly, it sets back the cool season invasion. So the non-fire tolerant species don't like it at all, and they get set back, and it allows what's there historically to come back to life. So like I said, logistical nightmare Pelee Island. You look back at all the historical records, and it takes a lot of planning and a lot of luck to really pull it off. In 2019, I thought Emma and her group at Ontario Nature did an extremely great job with their correspondence and their communications on their end, and all the due diligence that they had to do, and it made it really smooth for us to roll in there and with a burn window and conduct this burn. We wanted to burn on the Thursday, but there was a holiday Monday, and the holiday Monday sort of just messed everything up for everybody, and they couldn't group together and get onto the island in time to notify the residents and put the communications in order that they needed to. So we pushed the burn back to Friday, and Friday still looked like a really good day. Not as good a day as Thursday, but good enough to achieve what we were looking for. So we showed up, we actually showed up the week before, and we put in the boundaries. So the boundaries are important because that's what controls the fire spread, and it gives me one last look at how things are progressing through. When they started burning at the Stone Road Alvar, they did a couple burns in the spring, and they just realized that it promoted a lot of sweet clover and a lot of vegetation that they didn't want to promote. And as Emma was touching on, spring can be a really wet season with lots of wet pockets sitting on top of that limestone. So they didn't have really good fire coverage, and they didn't have the fire behavior needed to set back the woody shrubbery. They switched strategies in 97, 99, and they conducted, in 1993 and 1999, again, 1993 and 1997, and they conducted fall burns, and they did it by means of aerial ignition. So they dropped these little balls filled with a ignitable substance, and when it hits the ground, it ignites. They're called away balls, and they had really good success with the fall burns. They had more intense fire behavior. They had better fire coverage, and they were able to cover more area, but it was too costly to sustain having a helicopter out those times. So in 1999, they switched back to hand ignition, or to hand ignition on the ground, and there's most of it focused on the Urca site and a little bit on Fawn, which was a Federation Ontario Nature, I guess at the time, switched to Ontario Nature now. And all reports was that it was a successful burn. It was hard to push into the thickets of shrubbery, but overall, it did what it needed to do under the circumstances. And again, yeah, really logistically, it was a tough one to pull off, and they were lucky to do so. At that stage in 1999, the fawn for the Ontario Nature parcel that we burnt just recently was classified and put into a maintenance stage. So in the maintenance stage means that it's where we want it to be. There's the establishment stage, there's restoration, and then there's maintenance. So the site was opened back up to a limit that was beneficial to the site. It turned back to more historically open grasslands and oak sort of savanna Alvar. But then it took too long in between burns, I guess to say. 20 years in between from 99 to 2019 was much too long, and the site actually regressed back into a stage where it's now back. I guess I would classify it in a restoration again. So all that open area that was achieved through those 3 sets of quick, fast frequency burns got replaced and got filled in with a lot more shrubs and thickets. That becomes that changes the whole ecosystem, and the biggest thing is it changes the fire behavior. So in my post-burn report, it was really similar to the post-burn report in 97 and again in 99 for parts of the Urca side, was that in the open areas, mostly containing grasses and forbs and fine herbaceous material, the fire had very little trouble sustaining itself. It burned very well. It was ranked 2 to 3 fire, which means flame heights were 1.4 to 2 meters tall. We were able to girdle a majority of the open woody shrubs. I really seen a comment earlier saying that it didn't look like the fire affected the shrubs very much. And it won't, because the shrubs won't get consumed from the bottom to the top with a low intensity surface fire. And that's what we had in 2019, was we generated a low intensity surface fire that was slow spreading, but the slow spread added duration of flame impingement on the bases of the woody shrubbery. And we were able to set back quite a bit of it just through girdling. But where we came into problems was where thickets had formed. So the outside edge of this particular area of the Alvar just kept succeeding in with dense thickets of woody invasive shrubs. And underneath this low canopy, the grasses get suppressed, and all the herbaceous material and the flowering forbs, they disappear, and it just becomes almost barren mineral soil with a thin layer of hardwood leaf that's really unconducive to sustaining any sort of ignition whatsoever. So when the fire pushes through these open grass areas and into these thickets, you get some impingement on the outside area, the outside zones, but then it can't penetrate in, and it basically self-suppresses, and that's the end of that portion of burning. So it really ended up being a patchwork fire because of this. And there's nothing wrong with a patchwork fire, because it really does, it sustains your diversity. So when Emma was talking about the decrease in the amount of forest snails and worms, and particularly the earthworms that are in that litter layer, it makes sense, because in the open layer areas of the Alvar that was burnt, we were able to reduce that leaf litter and surface litter layer right down the mineral soil. And then as it got into the more shaded areas, we were able to only reduce it by 50%. And then we reduced it by nothing because we couldn't put fire into a lot of areas that were just too shaded and closed in with canopy. But these areas are the ones that repopulate those other areas. So you have to kind of look at what benefits will outweigh the you got to weigh the cons, the pros against the cons, right? So what good is going to come out of a short-term bad? You're going to set back. You will set back quite a few things, but 2 or 3 or 4 years down the road, that will come back, and it'll come back stronger, healthier, and with more diversity. And fire has been an active participant in maintaining these Albars for hundreds and hundreds of years. So, and they say every couple of years or every 1,000 years, a fire goes through an Alvar that wipes it out entirely. So it happens midsummer under high drought conditions, and it wipes out all the freestanding overstory canopy, so the bigger mature hardwoods and red cedars and stuff, and resets everything back to zero, and it starts from new. So in this case, we're just sort of poking at it a little bit and a little bit and a little bit. But what I'd like to see here is up in the frequency, because I think it has regressed back into a restoration stage, and it's very evident just by the amount of fire coverage we had. When we talk about the logistics of it, when we showed up, I calculate the weather every hour, and I'm measuring the moisture content of the fine fuels, because the fine fuels are the fire carrying fuels. So every hour the weather is taken, and you watch the moisture content decrease until it gets into prescription that produces the fire behavior that you need to meet your objectives. So we were planning on burning at, I think it was 1 o'clock in the afternoon. There was no rain in the forecast whatsoever all morning. And then these dark gray clouds come in from the west. And just as I finished up the briefing, we went from 100% clear skies to 100% cloud cover and a sprinkle of rain. So we were lucky with only a sprinkle of rain, because the west side of the island, I guess, got poured on, and we were left pretty much unscathed, and it took about 25 minutes for that precipitation to evaporate away. And the decision was made to do a perimeter ignition around the outside of the entire burn block while under cloud cover. So this would decrease the fire intensity next to the fire line and adjacent fuels. And that's the video that you had seen there. It was more of a low intensity fire under cloud cover. And so that took about half an hour, 45 minutes. And the strategy was that the radar showed that the cloud cover was going to disperse in that time. So then we get into the inside and start laying strip head fire. And the strip head fire was timed for when the sun came out, because it doesn't take long for the sun to come out and warm things and dry things back up, and it decreases the moisture content significantly in a short matter of time. So our fire behavior actually doubled once we got inside the burn block and started strip head fire ignition. And that's where we had some of our best results. So it didn't look like much, and it was very unimpressive on the outside, but the inside it was very impressive, and we actually had very good coverage. And the timing of it was pretty decent. A lot of the woody shrubs had started to go into dormancy. So the leaves were curling a bit and changing color a bit. So they had started putting energy back into the root system. Ideally, you want to get them girdled before that happens, so they don't sucker back up or coppice following spring. But Pelee Island's a pretty sensitive place, and I think that a summertime burn just isn't ideal for the habitat there. I think there was something like, I don't know, I might be wrong, but I thought we couldn't do any burning prior to August 25th. So it was that and into September. And then the farther we get into September, October, the cool season grasses really kick in, and we can't get any fire coverage. So it's a short window. For the flowering forbs, it was perfect because the flowering forbs had gone into dormancy and they're actually a mature seed head. So the low intensity fire just cleared off the understory of those, sort of knocking them over, but not burning them. So it created a seed bed of blackened mineral soil for those flowering forb seeds to scatter about. So imagine the increase in forb production was, I wouldn't say significant, but a lot more than it was the year before the burn. I don't know. I guess that's really all I can ramble on about off the top of my head. A few notes I made, but I know I enjoyed myself down there. That was my third time down there, and over the years, I can't say it's really changed a lot. I think it was a little bit more open, definitely in '99. Like I said, it was 20 years since we burned, and that's probably, I think that's the longest duration between burns I can ever think of conducting myself or hearing about. So generally with open sites, to maintain that openness, we're burning every 3, 4, 5 years, sometimes annually. At the most, it's 7 or 8 years. We find after that 7th year, those tree species and the undesirable hardwoods really started coming in and taking over. And then once they set, they form thickets, and then they change the fuel quite a bit. That fire doesn't even affect it, and you have to use other means. So in this case, I think we're at that point where maybe some thinning has to occur on the Alvar so we can get fire pushed through and into more areas the next time we're there. But that's about all I have. I can answer some questions in a little bit. I'll look through the notes here, but I guess I'll give it back to John or Brian.
Hello, it's John here. I'm not sure if you can all hear me now, but I just wanted to mention a couple more things. When I was phoning to get forest representatives for our club, the people I was trying to reach were Carl Sadler and Ken Goldsmith, and they were both away at the island. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that when I started looking at the Ontario Nature website about the Stone Road Alvar Reserve, I discovered that our own Stu Hiltz, Stu is a member of our club, and when he retired from the University of Guelph, he was into the south end of the Beaver Valley, and now he's living in Meaford. But he was the one who, along with Don Kirk, sort of came across this property and really recommended to Ontario, at that time it was FON, Federation of Ontario Naturalists, that they should acquire this property. And then they spearheaded a campaign to get the funding and to actually purchase that property for Ontario Nature. So I just wanted to mention those people that are part of our community, Carl and Ken and Stu, that have all had a role to play in that property. And one more thing, Jason, when you are speaking or answering, if you could just lean forward towards where your notes are, the audio comes through much better when you do. We were having some trouble hearing you, but for the remainder of questions, that's all I have anyway. I'm going to leave it to Pam and to Brian to wrap up though, and maybe back to Emma.
Yeah, I just think I would just add to what Jay said, that I think it was there are so many challenges to completing this type of work on an island, just from a logistics perspective, and just how quick the weather can change just within a given day in terms of getting those conditions just right. Yeah, so I think that you hit on a couple of points in terms of timing of when to burn, and that was a real, we went back and forth around that decision due to the fact that really due to the site conditions in the spring, it's so wet that's really not ideal to burn for just it's just a completely flooded environment. Like you're wearing rubber boots, and there's just really no way that you could get a good fire going and any kind of burn, that a burn would take under those conditions. And then, of course, during the active season is so many species at risk are on the property or traveling through the property that poses a number of challenges. And so really that very narrow window in the fall between when conditions are dry before plants start to senesce too much is like this sweet spot that's certainly challenging to get right every single time. So it is, that was just sort of some additional comments to kind of add to what Jay said. And his comment around thinning is also a conversation that we've been having, and we have a PhD student who has been doing some active shrub removal and kind of looking at different approaches to and comparing sort of how shrub removal paired with the burn versus burn without shrub removal, and looking at how it affects microhabitat for snakes in particular. But it's definitely something that we're considering as we look to what our future plans will be for implementing ongoing burns at the site. Shrub removal will likely, be something we need to kind of pursue with more effort, just to, like if we want to maintain a low burn intensity, it's going to take quite some time before the fire will actually really have a significant impact on the shrubs, the shrub growth across that area. So that was just those two additional comments that I wanted to add.
Okay, down in the question and answer area, I don't know if you guys can click on that or not, but I can and read the questions to you if you would like.
Yeah.
Okay. One of them is, what causes or creates an Alvar?
So it's interesting, like in the context of Stone Road, sort of the persistence of Alvar habitats is, these disturbances and the frequencies at which they occur across the landscape. So in terms of what initially established Stone Road Alvar, it could, I can't say with absolute certainty, but certainly, like a single sort of lightning strike that led to a small scale burn, is those types of disturbances across the landscape can certainly, open up areas, and then the continuation and the persistence of those disturbances within that area can help to maintain Alvar habitat over the longer term.
Okay. There's a question here. How do you control the burn so that it doesn't get out of control?
Yeah, so
That's
Jason
more,
kind of touched on that a little
Jason.
bit with the
Yeah, I can.
I can let you speak to that.
Sure. So that's a whole part of calling it a controlled burn. So a lot of it has to do with the planning. So it's just having an understanding of how each differing fuel type affects fire behavior, and how the 4 principles of weather affect fire behavior, and then sort of merging all that together. So you're calculating. What we do, we calculate the weather on site daily for a period of time leading up to a burn event, and then that is all, I guess, formulated into moisture codes and moisture content of different fuel size classifications. So if I have, I want to burn grass, I want to burn at, it's burnable at 20% moisture content. Anything above that is just going to smoke and smolder out. Anything below that is going to burn. And if I'm at 3 or 4 or 5%, it's going to be extremely volatile. So there's a window there. And then I got to match that up with wind velocity. The more wind, the faster it's going to spread, right? Humidity is going to affect the moisture content. Available or sunlight, effective solar radiation, they call it. So it has a big effect on the moisture content in the fine fuels. And landscape. So we got terrain, we got hills, we got valleys, we got flats. So we put that all together, and we want to. Basically, you can hone in on the type of fire that you can create. You can create intensity, and you can create rates of spread by picking the perfect time to conduct that fire. And then our other control measures are putting in fuel breaks. So we can either just remove the fuel down the mineral soil. We may have to cut and clear. In some cases, we disc if we're in extremely volatile fuel on both sides of the fire line. Then we have to, and then the width of those fire breaks are measured by the amount of flame length and fire intensity adjacent to those boundaries. So that just decreases spot fire potential and combustion through radiant heat across the fire line. So it's cool. It's scientific. There's a lot of measuring and math involved, and it's really satisfying when you can project a fire on paper and in your mind, and then you can see it come to realization visually right in front of you, and it's what you wanted to make.
Okay, thank you. Another question is, within the Alvar areas of interest, what are the rate of woody / non-desirable encroachment? So within your Alvar area of interest, what is the rate of woody / non-desirable encroachment? How long would you predict it would take for the Alvar habitat to blink out if not burnt?
If you look at the historical records and the post-home burn records going back to when did they start here? 1993. Every major problem they had was pushing fire through these thickets. That's where it all just sort of smoldered out. And recommendations each and every time was to create avenues through these thickets to get fire to go in there, to get ignition through there. But like I said, it's been
Well, I think we've lost Jason. There must be a little glitch in there.
Maybe his internet just
Yeah,
cut
stalled.
out momentarily.
Do you want to answer some of that,
Yeah, for
Emma?
sure.
Like,
Yeah.
okay, so the rate of the woody encroachment, and how long would you predict that it takes the Alvar habitat to blink out if it's not burnt?
Yeah, it's a great question in terms of, you know, how long it would take for sort of shrub encroachment to really move across the Alvar. I don't think, like, up until this point, burns have been taking place within the Stoneward Alvar complex, but we have not done a great job of monitoring. So, you know, during the burn, the burn conditions are monitored and there are burn reports produced, but in terms of understanding the impact that it has on the plant communities and the many ecological interactions happening within the system is not something that we've documented. So our efforts on completing this pre and post burn monitoring are to really help us better understand exactly what how these plant and animal communities are responding to the prescribed burn, to help us address some of these questions of how frequently do we need to be burning? How are plants responding? Are we seeing changes in species composition, or what kind of patterns and regrowth are we seeing for different species? And just answering some of these types of questions to really inform our future stewardship actions and management planning for the property. Yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Okay. What are some of the rare species which are fire dependent?
Yeah, so within the recovery strategy for a number that burn is outlined in the recovery strategy is prescribed burns as a way to maintain open Alvar habitat for a number of at-risk species. So for blue ash and chinkapin oak, climbing prairie rose, in the recovery strategy for those species, burn is associated with maintaining the habitat required for those species, or the conditions required for those species to thrive and persist. Also for at-risk snakes like eastern fox snake and blue racer that require open habitat in order to thermoregulate. The continued persistence of these open Alvar systems through prescribed burns is an important disturbance to maintain the ideal habitat conditions for those species as well. So those are just, some examples of species that are found on Stone Road Alvar that rely on prescribed burns and other disturbances to maintain those open habitats.
Okay, thank you. There's a couple more questions, but there's one here that part of their question is, what is the fate of the small critters and their habitats as the result of the burns?
Yeah, so as we had kind of talked about a little bit, the burn is very patchy in its distribution. So there are some areas that had a higher intensity fire, and other areas that where it was lower, which I think when I showed that map for the broad-banded forest snail densities, you could see that patchiness across the landscape before the burn took place, and then the fact that the response wasn't uniform across the burn area also suggests that there was the patchiness that you could see across the landscape is also reflected in snail density. So I think the burn is not uniform across the landscape, so there are opportunities for some of these smaller for these invertebrates to find microhabitat or refugia within the burn patch. And for animals like bees or birds or snakes that are much more mobile, that can traverse across the landscape, they are adapted to systems that experience these types of disturbances, and so they have those adaptations to be able to respond. And but something we of course took into consideration with the timing of the burn is trying to minimize the impact on the numerous species at risk and non-species at risk that are found on the property, and trying to minimize while achieving the desired impact on the vegetation community through the burn, while also minimizing the risks to other species.
Okay, There's a few more questions, but I think we really only have time for about one more. One of them, I'm just going to pick them at random, is are these burns not interfering with the natural cycle?
I think historically with many systems that historically, so not just on Alvar, that would have been, fire would be a natural part of the disturbance cycle within those systems, with many areas becoming more developed. A lot of those natural disturbances have been suppressed. And so I think in a lot of ways, these disturbance cycles should be more frequent than they have been historically. And so we're at this point in time trying to better understand what those natural cycles look like and how to reintroduce them, or get back to some sort of regular burning cycle that reflects what a natural fire regime would look like for a particular area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a tough job, I would think, to try and decide what is best for that area, whether it be a natural thing or whether we should step in and help it along. So yeah, I'm sure it's very difficult at times. Well, thank you very much to both of you.
Yeah, this has been, I've been involved in this project for a number of years now, and it's just a fantastic research collaborative and really interesting and meaningful work. So I'm always happy and to chat about what we're up to. And if anyone has questions that didn't get answered, you're more than welcome to send me an email, and I'll do my best to follow up.
Okay, thank you very much. It was a very interesting thing. It's something that fire is just one of those things where people are always never sure whether we have control or not. So it's something that can be certainly useful, but it sure can be destructive. And I think it's interesting to hear that it can be useful too. Okay, thank you very much. There's one last thing. We do have a door prize. It consists of this book. I don't know, maybe if I turn my light on here, you'll be able to see. There, maybe. It's a book about birding, called Being a Bird in North America. That's our door prize for tonight, and the person who got that is Lee Papineau. So we'll be sending that book out to you. I know Brian knows you, Lee, and he can give us our contact info, and then I can get that out to you. And hopefully you can enjoy it and use it for the coming season that's coming up, that a lot more birds will be in our area. So thank you everyone for participating. Our next, I don't even know what our next thing is. I'd have to get my list, but anyways, next month, it'll be very interesting to see what's coming up to us in the future. I'll keep in touch with all of you. I hope you look at your e-heralds so that you can come into the Malcolm Bluff Shores BioBlitz if that's what keeps you interested in the carbon assessment. So those are some things that are really good. I'm still looking for a treasurer. I haven't had any names pop up. So that's another thing that we need. But other than that, I wish you all well and be safe. And remember the biggest thing is washing your hands for COVID. So I think that's it, everyone. I hope you have a good rest of January, and we'll see you again all in February.
Thanks
Emma.
Bye.
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 Bye.